living in a new world with an whole soul. The rich man knows the rich man, Lord knows they all just wanna have total control. Wanna know what you think, wanna know what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do. Your dollar ain't shit, and it's taxed to no end, cause the rich man, cause the rich man.
All right. Sorry if you heard that. So we were going to be doing another Where There Is No Doctor, but there was too much good conversation, and we've had this discussion a couple of times, and we've had it in person too. And I figured it was just kind of important to kind of record this, because we've hinted at it before. Not really hinted at. We've talked about it a little bit with stuff that's relevant and important to watch. Talking about like specifically like movies and TV shows that you can actually like garner stuff from, and like instead of just like, you know, blind entertainment and getting, you know, propagandized by the party, you can actually like learn things at the same time while being like entertained and kind of like distracted from things, but also reminded of things going on in the same way.
I don't know what you're talking about. I just love to watch Ms. Marvel. I mean, that just touches me.
Yeah. Yep. Oh. The good guys always win, and there's complications that can't be solved by a good montage, and
nothing can't be solved by a good montage.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, so, well, so okay, here, this actually brings up another I have another thought, and I think this is generational thing. I was commenting on a YouTube video from, I believe it's Soleth Archive. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, but he was talking about the it's about as bad as 45 versus 9mm, but the gray man versus the over tactical thing, right? And so here's some interesting points. But I brought up in my comment like 13 Hours as a movie, right? As far as like, all right, go watch that. Yes, I know it's a movie. Yes, but go watch that as, where are they dressing like, not like the locals. They're not locals. They're dressing like Americans, but they're dressing like American civilians going through the airport and just kind of around town. Versus when they go over and they jock up and they go and, you know, do bad things to bad people. And like kind of that'll kind of give you a sense of when you are going low key versus very overt. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're dressing up in a pattern. It's just like, how are you presenting yourself to the world? And his counterpoint was like, well, that's a movie based on a story about something that may have, you know, like how things went down. I was like, okay, fair. Like, I'm not sure how that negates the points I'm making, but what he brought up in his in his response was all the stuff, like all the war footage from Ukraine, which made me think, and I was thinking this to myself. This is the first time I think I've verbalized this, was my generation, because we didn't have access to footage, GoPro footage from a war zone. If we were looking at these lessons, we watched movies. Where it's like we're watching The Great Raid, Black Hawk Down, 13 Hours, or World War II stuff. Like this is where we get a lot of our lessons, like Shooter, whatever. A lot of these things that we're going to watch, movies and movies and TV shows, was kind of where we got those lessons, because this was pre-internet, or internet was early on. We don't have this whole thing where you have supposedly, we'll assume, valid footage from actual war zones. Again, we're making an assumption there, which I will come back to that. I had a thought when I was earlier about the whole thing of the footage that you can see. You need to think about that. But we didn't have that, right? So we used stories, professional productions. They're a simplification or a elaboration on actual events, possibly, or just a good story. Maybe that has good lessons. So that's what we would use. So I realized, like, all right, this is kind of a generational thing. I'm using this because of what I'm familiar with, and we got another generation that uses something else. So like, okay, I can
Mhm.
adjust that. I understand that. My caution, just like the caution is appropriate to like, hey, that's a movie. Yes, okay, that's a good point. My caution to this new stuff that's like that's quote unquote real footage is you need to keep in mind, why are you seeing it? All right. Now, follow me with this, okay? There's a science fiction, or excuse me, a fantasy series written by Terry Pratchett, called The Discworld. It's a satirical fantasy series. In one of the books, the tyrant of the main city is being poisoned, and the chief of the police force is trying to figure out what's poisoning him, and they're going through everything in the environment. They're turning over, move him into a new room, so check his food, everything. They're looking everywhere, right? They don't look at the one thing that they use to look with, which is the candle, the light source.
Hmm.
If you're seeing anything in this, like, this is like, Victorian era or whatever,
It's roughly set.
you're not paying attention to your light source when you're looking at things, because if you're looking at something in that environment, a candle is burning, right? So you're not paying attention to that. So if you see footage online, somebody recorded it. Why were they recording it? Why did they have a lens pointed at it? And why did they release it to you? How did you get it? So I'll give you an example of that. This was this woman, this congresswoman, a couple weeks ago. I think she's a representative from Colorado. There was footage of her in the theater, hanky and panky going on. All right, so points made there, and I don't know the whole story, but all right, you're seeing this footage in a dark theater. You're
Mhm.
seeing a night vision camera pointed directly at her and her companion there in the theater. Why? Why is that? Why is there a night vision camera in that theater? Could be just a standard security practice. I don't know. Why is it pointed directly at where she's sitting? Was there a disturbance and they can move it, and it's like, oh, okay, we're gonna surveil this because there's a disturbance going on? Or was this a setup? Y'all need to go read the Moscow rules, because the Moscow rules are not just for Moscow. Pay special attention to rule number 3, which is anyone can be under enemy control. So I won't go through all the Moscow rules right now. I can't quote you off of the top of my head. But the point being, rule number 3, which is assume that everyone can be under enemy control. The Moscow rules, just to be clear, was written for they were rules for U.S. intelligence operatives, case officers, etc., working in Moscow in the U.S. The days of the USSR. But excuse me. But I would suggest that if you're a politician or anyone working in DC, you should rethink that, and that should be the DC rules, and you should be carefully considering that as a way to live. So that's my rant on that topic. Just be aware, if you're seeing footage, why are you seeing that footage? Why does the footage exist? And why are you seeing it? So just those 2 questions. You won't always be able to answer them, but something to keep in mind.
Yeah, no, it's definitely the whole if you weren't aware, you're living under a rock. The incident we're talking about is the representative Boebert, Boebert, however you say her name, from Colorado, who was joined the company of a man. She is just recently divorced. and was dating this individual, and they went out to go see production of,
Beetlejuice,
was
Beetlejuice,
it
I believe.
Beetlejuice? Yeah, Beetlejuice something.
That's
It
the
was
one
a
irrelevant
theater
detail.
production. And if you haven't been to a theater production of anything, generally where like the audience sits is like pitch black. So the fact that like we're getting this clear audio, it obviously like was using some sort of like night vision camera, maybe not necessarily like a PBS 14, but like just stuff that like surveillance or like PIs and entities like that would have access to video of them kind of getting touchy feely, and then getting escorted out. It's a direct example of like the propaganda machine at work. Like they knew that she was going to be there. And I don't know if she had like posted anything that she was going to be, but they like it was pointed at her seat. Like that was not by accident. Yeah, that would. I mean, that's yeah, that's a good description. Is it's it's an ambush. If you're in a position like that, man, you have to be aware that everything you do is under a microscope.
So I was referencing the Moscow rules. We'll go through them. Agent Tony Mendez wrote that although no one had written them down, they were the precepts we all understood for conducting operations in the most difficult of operating environments, the Soviet capital. By the time they got to Moscow, everyone knew these rules. They were dead simple and full of common sense. All right. Number 1, assume nothing. Very difficult to do. Number 2, never go against your gut. Number 3, everyone is potentially under opposition control. Number 4, do not look back. You are never completely alone. Number 5, go with the flow, blend in. Number 6, vary your pattern and stay within your cover. Just a note, if you want to hear more about that, go listen to Radio Contra, specifically Lessons from the Farm on the Podbean app. Number 7, lull them into a sense of complacency. Number 8, do not harass the opposition. I repeat, do not harass the opposition. Number 6, pick the time and place for action. Number 10, keep your options open. So that's all good. I think that's posted up at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C.
Yep.
So
it's on their website.
Remus used to have them posted on the Woodpile Report site. That's where I think I first ran across them. And I had thought that one of them was always assume you're under surveillance, but that's not one of them. There is the never always assume you're never alone.
Yeah.
So it's good stuff. It's good things to keep in mind.
Yeah.
So we were talking about some movies. We were kind of talking about the whole just gosh, we were talking about Enemy of the State. You were talking
I'd never watched it, and I just watched it the other day, and I was kind of, that movie came out in 1998. That's 25 years ago. And you made the reference in when they're in the copper cage, talking about how the NSA has the ability to listen in on every phone call, read every pager, to just in case you weren't aware that it came out in 1998, read every email, all these other things. And it's like, and that was stuff they had the ability to do 20 years ago. You're like, that was 45 years ago then from now. Like it's a good movie, and there's some interesting stuff in there.
It's a cautionary tale as to what can happen when people in positions of authority who aren't accountable to anyone make mistakes, and they don't want to be held accountable.
Yeah.
So they then go from making a mistake to doing things that are just outright wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I kind of remember the story. It's like the most of it's just them covering their tracks.
Yeah.
Trying to cover their tracks in the process of trying to kill Will Smith, to cover their tracks for a mistake they made, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, everybody makes mistakes, but when you don't have accountability, um, and yeah, some people would argue that this is part of what we've seen with the full-throated support for money going to Ukraine, is that this is
Mm-hmm.
good money following bad, because some people will not be held accountable.
Yeah.
Period. Um, so
Yeah.
it's a good movie. I haven't seen it in a long time. I think I referenced Hunt for Red October when we were talking about radio stuff, just as far as Hunt for Red October and 13 Days,
Mm-hmm.
which Cuban Missile Crisis, which it's not a real big action movie. There's some action, but it's more the psychological element of what's going on.
Yeah.
I believe it's is it Secretary of State who's yelling at this admiral saying like, this whole thing is language as far as like move, counter move with the military forces and the blockades and everything. This is like the president talking to I don't know what the Russian
Premiere.
premier, thank
Yeah.
you, Soviet specifically,
Mm-hmm.
premier, like this is language. And I was like, that's a really good way to boil down what's going on here. It's like move, counter move, where they're talking to each other, right, through these things. Another one, while we're on the subject of Soviets, would be Chernobyl.
Yes.
And again, the lesson I took away from Chernobyl is not technical detail. It's not about, yeah, the technical detail was really interesting. I kind of understood better what happened than I ever did before.
Mm-hmm.
The courage of some of these folks and what they did, knowing what they were going to be exposed to and what the results were going to be.
Yep.
All of that is fantastic. To me, that is not the point of the story. And I don't think that's the point as presented by the story, is that as presented by the producers, you cannot have like lies kill.
Yep.
And this was the Soviet Union. Their position was, we don't have nuclear accidents, and physics doesn't care what your political position is, and has a way of making its presence known. So,
Mm-hmm.
and these people pay the price of a state that could not suffer an embarrassment.
Mm-hmm.
Take that for what you will.
Mm.
But when you have a state that cannot allow itself to be embarrassed, cannot allow itself to be not and doesn't hold itself accountable,
Mm-hmm.
and any kind of problem it just tries to bury, this is not a recipe for success.
Yeah. I just thought of this when you were talking about Ukraine, talking about Chernobyl. I remember it was a couple weeks ago. It was a month ago when one of the nuclear power plants was like supposed to be like under attack or whatever, and they were like, the Russians are gonna strike it or something like that. And like some idiot on Twitter was going on, and they were like, "Oh, if that really happens, that's going to be that's going to be Ukraine's Chernobyl." And everyone's like, "Is someone going to tell him? Someone needs to tell him. I'm going to tell him."
Yeah,
just 10 seconds of Google, man. That's all you got to do. Just 10 seconds of Google save you a lifetime of.
I think sometime within my lifetime, we're gonna have some pontiff, some pontiff on, not to offend the Catholics to me using that term incorrectly, but somebody, some know-it-all on Twitter is going to utter the phrase, "This is Texas's Alamo." Like, wait a minute.
You keep using that word. I do not
What?
think it means what you think it means.
If you hey, go read it. Go crack. No, not a history book. Go crack a Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm.
Quick, before they edit it, go read Wikipedia.
Yeah.
That's another good. Yeah, that's another good. Texas Rising. It's as a miniseries that came after the events of the Alamo is when it's set. I mean, probably my favorite character is the actor that played Negan on the Walking Dead. He plays Deef somebody, the deaf guy. He's one of the Texas Rangers. And it's various adventures. It's not a deep dive on like the state, commentary on the state of the world. But it is an interesting story as far as a little bit of the intelligence side and the spy side. It's very much a David and Goliath kind of war story. So those elements, I found it interesting. I didn't know much about that conflict. I guess I still don't, because all I did was watch the miniseries. But everybody remembers the Alamo, and we even have a phrase for that. But like, okay, what happened after that? Maybe able to understand Texans a little more.
But it's one of those things, if you don't live in the area that was affected by that specific thing, it just gets memory hold. And especially when it was something, and this is not making light of the situation like that or the events that happened at the Alamo, but when it was something that happened, over 150 years ago, if you weren't directly affected by it, or it's not something that is taught about at the level that it is in like state level public education, you're just not going to know that much about it unless you have the desire to go on your own, because there's so much stuff that's happened. It's impossible to know all of it. There's so many things that have happened all over the world, in 2,000 years, that it's hard to really like understand all of it and understand the minutia of everything that happened. So you kind of have to like, okay, I'm just gonna like kind of focus on things that are relevant, and anything else I'm really not gonna pay that much attention to.
I think the Alamo is one of those things that it's like, I don't mean to disrespect the folks that died there, but it was not the hot gates. Okay, it did not have the strategic impact or even the tactical impact
No.
of Thermopylae, right? I mean, it was a huge propaganda. It was huge.
Yes.
Huge propaganda campaign. But it didn't settle anything. It didn't even really put anybody in a position of advantage on their side. It's like, okay.
The only thing it really did was rally people.
Yes.
Because before it was just kind of this thing that was happening, like, oh yeah, I heard about that. And all of a sudden, like, they did what? Oh, and now all of a sudden the entire territory is just like lockstep in arms against the Mexican army.
Yeah, I mean, we have the story of the shot heard around the world, right? As far as,
a Pyrrhic victory.
Right. So we've got.
Well, I'm probably misusing that term, actually, now that I think about it. Yeah, I don't think that counts as that.
No, I don't think in that context. But you think about that story. We're going back now to the colonial the 1776. 75? Okay, 75. So the British are coming to seize the military stores at this one farmer's, who's also he's a leader in the local militia. And they're coming to seize these weapons at this farm. They get into a gunfight in Lexington on the public green. Several people die there, and then they continue up the road to Concord. And it is at Concord where 4,000 American militia have rallied and face off with these 96 British troops that they get there across this bridge, the Old North Bridge. And that is the site that is now like that was memorialized in a poem by somebody who lived in the area. I can't remember what Longfellow. I don't remember. Sorry. maybe it was Nathaniel Hawthorne. I don't recall, but it was sometime later that this is memorialized. The shot heard around the world. Well, there was actually bloodshed earlier that day.
Yep.
But how we remember it is, being Americans, we like it when like 4,000 of us, just they crush the British. We like our big, win.
If you want to actually follow that through, yeah, it was 4,000 militia against just shy of 100 British, but more the reason that was the shot heard around the world was that was the first time that a shot was ordered.
That's
Lexington, things happened, things went badly, people started firing, there was no order to do so. It was basically the order actually was, stand your ground, don't start fire, like don't initiate. But at Concord, there's several hours later, the news of Lexington had already gotten there. And so, and the militia made the conscious decision for it's like, no, this time we go on the offensive and we attack.
That's a good point.
That's why it's the shot heard around the world, specifically. But also, technically, the British won. Because the militia pursued the British back to Boston and then surrendered.
The militia surrendered to the
Yes.
British. That's an interesting thing.
So that was a victory for the British.
Okay, so yeah, it was a Pyrrhic victory for the British. Okay,
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, like it does matter,
But
not just what
Boston-
happens, but under what authority it happens.
Boston was at that point. There weren't bridges in. There was one very narrow isthmus. Boston modern has a ton of infill, which makes it easy to get to, short bridges even, but there was one road and one gate. And the British literally could put up a siege. Like could just withdraw behind those gates. They had full harbor access and control. And so it's like the militia was not going to win that one.
When you think about actually how the Old North Bridge worked, it wasn't like the militia were keeping them out of town. British advanced across the Old North Bridge. They engage with the Americans. They retreat across the bridge, and continue to engage with the Americans. So the British leadership was smart to get that choke point between them and the Americans. Like that, it's like, hey, I'm outnumbered like 40-1. I'm going to put this choke point where they have to come at me, relatively narrow. I'm not going to get flanked this way.
Yeah.
The numbers.
Yeah. So like this is one of these things that affect your opponent.
Yeah, there's a common trope that kind of gets pushed around that like during the Revolution, the Americans were so smart because we didn't fight like the British, which is absolutely not true. We fought in rows and lines.
Yeah, the regulars did.
The militia fought as skirmishers, and they were more of like a quick reaction force that would hold ground just long enough for regulars that were already in the area to respond. They were not taking ground. They were not advancing and pushing objectives. The simple fact of how, and this is like it's from a gross misunderstanding of what a militia is and how it's supposed to act and like what its goals are versus an organized professional military. In an organized professional military, like you sign a contract, you are like, that is your job in a professional military. You don't do anything else. Your paycheck comes from your duties as a soldier. In a militia, it's all volunteer. At any point in time, you can just be like, yeah, no, this ain't for me, man. I'm out. And they cannot do anything to you. You can just like at any point in time, nope, I got to go back home and take care of shit. And it's unpaid.
And you bring your own stuff.
You're bringing your own stuff. You're paying for your own equipment. It's all unpaid. And so you have this gaggle of people, and they care about their specific area. You're not going to take this militia and push them into 3 counties over. And this is why Nathaniel Greene was so good at what he did, because as he moved around, he basically like moved a command structure and was pulling people from the local county he was fighting in at the time. So like when we talk about like the Battle of Cowpens, he was pulling people from the surrounding counties, and like what led to the Battle of Cowpens, like he was able to move because he just told his militia to just disperse into the local populace because they already were the local populace, and he would just move a couple counties over, going up into Virginia, crossing the Danville River, and then going back down across, going into what is now modern day Liberty, North Carolina, and he would just pull from the local areas and could get new people, fresh horses and men, and just constantly resupply himself from the local populace. Whereas the British couldn't do that same thing.
That does assume a certain level of competence.
Yes.
That have a pool to on.
Yeah. And they were also being used differently because they weren't going on large offensive marches across vast swaths of territory, because you don't have like the big difference between like a militia and a professional military is the logistics.
Right.
And that's because militias are stuck to their local area because they don't have that supply train to supply them on those long marches inward.
Infantry takes and holds ground, right? That is an offensive function of infantry. Whereas if you're the locals defending your turf, you're not taking anybody else's ground. You're holding yours as best you can. This is actually, I think, part of the mindset of where, you had a lot of Appalachians, to jump conflicts for a second. You had a lot of folks from Appalachia who, when Robert E. Lee decided it was strategically advantageous to take the war north to try to make it hurt for the North. A lot of the folks in Appalachia are like, that's not what I signed up for. I signed up to push people out of my state.
Yeah.
Not to sign up to invade somebody else.
Yeah.
And so he had a lot of people leaving the Appalachian people specifically. Like that's where they had
led to a whole massive feud.
Yeah. So I mean, that's just that was mindset. It's like it's not everybody in those forces were all of like uniform mindset as far as what this is about, right?
Yeah.
You had different views on what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, and those different forces are applied differently. And there's just this gross misunderstanding of why forces of that time, like pre-Napoleonic forces, would go, and you can even argue Napoleonic, why they would go to war, like in those, why would you go fight somebody in a straight line? Well, it's the only way musket loaders, like smoothbore muskets, are effective.
The only way they worked
is you're with outside of, you get to 100 meters, you've lost your 80 meters, you've lost your effect. You have to be close, and the only way to do that is to have people stand in a line, and that requires like a massive amount of discipline, which explains like why the militaries were organized the way that they were, and why the officers stood at the back of the lines to prevent people from deserting, and why they were given pistols instead of rifles. And it's this whole, like, once you start understanding like why things were done the way they were, like now everything else makes sense, and why like you do not target the officers in any sort of polite, civilized engagement, because the officers were the educated class. It wasn't just like, oh, you got a bachelor's degree, you're an officer. Like, no, man, like these guys have like actual like real education. Like they know like basically what we consider like a high school education is what like they're getting, plus like maybe an associate's, but like a true liberal arts degree, like we're talking like the great books educations.
Part of that was also a holdover from the aristocracy, but
but that was very much alive and well at that point in time, and like that was why you didn't do those things, because if you lose the officer corps holding on to that discipline and keeping people together, now it just becomes a gaggle, and like no one knows what's going to happen if like this gaggle like ends up getting together, and now like these guys start talking and they realize that like, yeah, I was told to hate you, but actually like you're just as poor as I am, and I have more in common with you than I do with the guys that are wearing the same color uniform as me. So there was a lot of reasons why they did what they did, And you can't just like write it off as like, oh, the British were stupid for fighting in nice, pretty little neat rows. It's like, no, you're an idiot if that's why you think they did that, just because it was like the lazy and dumb option. Like the British did not take over the like most of the known world because they were dumb. Like they were very effective at what they did, and that's what makes the American Revolution so wild and why it set off this chain of events across the known world, because you have like the world's most powerful, and that was not just a term that was thrown around lightly, like it's thrown around now, like that meant something. They controlled all of the shipping lanes, they controlled the major shipping areas, like it was British controlled. You know, the British East India Trading Company was like a staple, like that was, they had their own military. That was not because they didn't know what they were doing and they were idiots and morons and they didn't want to hide in trees. It was because there was a certain way warfare was fought at that time. The reason why we did things differently is because when people in charge of the militia, most of which were veterans of the French and Indian War, had gotten their asses handed to them by the French and the Indians, who were basically fighting like an SF war, like basically mirroring what Mac v. Sog did. If you look at how the French were not sending massive armies. They did, but not to the extent of the British were during the French and Indian War, because the French were too busy fighting in Europe during the 7 Years' War, as it was known everywhere else outside of North America.
That's something that we as Americans in our own mythos conveniently that is, we tell ourselves
we might have been like a part of what started the 7 Years' War, but like there was other stuff going on.
But if you even just going back to the the War for Independence, we had outside help from the French,
massively so,
very material help from the French, and also the Brits had other things on their plate. The time, like the Brits had a whole lot of other interests to deal with. And look, we just have this one thing, right? And they've got to keep up all these plates spinning. So the timing was right, and you had backing of another nation state. You could supply things that only another nation state can supply,
which didn't happen until after the Battle of Cowpens, that the French were like, oh, you guys can actually, because up until then it was just losses by Washington. It wasn't, if it wasn't for Nathaniel Greene, we would not be the country that we are today, and I will die by that statement.
So that goes to the point of like, when you're looking at irregular warfare, guerrilla warfare, all these kinds of things, it's not just about like what are you affecting directly, it's how are you projecting your side's chances to our players, right? I'm not sure who would. Anyway, I'm not sure exactly who would be on our side against the Russians or the Chinese, but the Australians like the scrap. Maybe they'd be up for it. I don't know, but
they're pretty infiltrated by China right now.
Probably have their own problems.
Yeah,
against the local flora and fauna trying to kill them.
That too. When you fight an entire war against emus and then lose.
I saw a meme about like, don't pick on this one too much. We got the wild hog problem.
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I don't know who do you get? I mean, you do have a fairly motivated group of people who are used to unpleasantness in the Hispanic population.
Yeah,
it's man, I just got here. Now you want to take this away from me?
Yeah. The situation very similarly mirrors, in some ways, it mirrors pre-revolution colonist, like colonial America, in that you have like a large population, well, not a large, but you have like a population of like post-war veterans that learned a very specific type of warfare that they had to face up against, and they learned a bunch of lessons about how ineffective this prim and proper, peer-to-peer conflict is against peer versus not peer that is not fighting as a peer. Because the way the French were fighting in the French and Indians, they were basically just like I mean, it was like I said, I talked about like McAfee Saw, like it's like French advisors leading like tribes of Indians to go attack like American British outposts in the wilderness, and they did it quite well because it's kind of what like Indian warfare was at that time. And it was a lot of guerrilla warfare, and you have a lot of these people that like learned these lessons in blood the hard way. Paul Revere and a lot of the people that he was friends with in Boston, that he brought to Samuel Adams, when they were starting the Sons of Liberty. It was a lot of people that had fought in that conflict and learned things the hard way about how effective that type of warfare is against the British. And when it came down to like, okay, like the self-entitled aristocracy in the colonies decided they wanted to play dress up and fight the British like the British. Well, now like these two armies are going to try to gang up against them in the north, and we have to do something. And that's where Nathaniel Greene, a guy who at the start of the war had nothing to his name and by the end was a general and did quite well for himself. And as I said earlier, is probably the reason, not probably, is the reason why we exist as a country today, because of his actions and how he fought with militia units and understood what militia and Minutemen units were capable of and employed them in ways that made the most sense, and not like, okay, I'm going to take this group of guys that are mostly farmers and craftsmen and tradesmen and try to turn them into professional soldiers. No, instead I'm going to take them and use their understanding of the local area and use them as a guerrilla force to fight against, because he understood that it was not like we didn't have to necessarily win, we just had to not lose, and like a war of attrition, and fought it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And kept that army separate, so that way the two armies that the British put into the colonies didn't link up to go take out Washington, because Washington was more of like a symbolic threat than he was an actual like military threat against the British. And he did that long enough to garner support he wasn't garnering support, but enough for the Continental Congress to garner support from the French, because the French weren't just going to be like, oh, hey, this guy's attacking the Brits, we're going to go support them. Like, whoa, we need to make sure that like we're spending good money here.
Yeah, T.E. Lawrence did something analogous in his very titrated destruction of the Turkish-held railroad. He would break it enough where they had to fix it, but not so much that they said, all right, we can't fix this, let's just abandon it. Because if you do that, now you've freed up all these troops who are now going to be a new army. You want to keep all that. It gets down to economics, right? It takes a whole lot less resources to harass a big organization that has infrastructure to protect. You can tie down a whole lot of resources protecting resources.
Mm-hmm.
Resources need resources to protect them, who then need more resources. If you do it right, I mean, you can have a very asymmetric effect. T.E. Lawrence was not going to win World War I doing that, but he can tie down a lot of assets that keep his side from having to deal with something else. That's actually another good movie. As far as I don't know if it really explains much of that, but the Lawrence of Arabia is another interesting film.
I still need to see that.
Yeah, I mean, Alec Guinness. I mean, if he wants to play a psychotic British officer in Bridge on the River Kwai, or he wants to play a Bedouin sheik, or he wants to play Obi-Wan Kenobi, like whatever. Like I'm down. It's like this talk. Going back to Francis Marion for a little bit. A lot of people have said the movie The Patriot. Since we're kind of on the movies and television,
Yeah.
The movie The Patriot was based in large part on him. But then I think Walt Disney actually did a show they called The Swamp Fox. And it's
back when Disney was good.
Back when Disney was decent.
They actually included an intro giving the historical context.
Yeah,
to this.
Back when Disney loved America. Yeah. So I mean, it's a very Disney show, and that it's like it's very family friendly and all that good stuff, but and it's somewhat fanciful in some ways, but it makes the point that there were a lot of loyalists, a lot of people that were loyal Englishmen. They didn't have any interest in rebelling from the crown, because you got to remember, like, this is rebellion. Like, a lot of the colonists that were still loyal to their way of thinking. They're loyal Englishmen. This is rebellion, and like, we're going to do everything we can to help the king that we toast and that we're loyal to. Right? This is just part of being good Englishmen. And they're intermixed in those colonies. Like, you can't. There's not just all the loyalists are in this colony and all the patriots are in this colony. It's all intermixed. And there's a lesson in there somewhere. But that show is very interesting as far as like people are burning each other's homesteads and like all this local politics, which is part of the Francis Marion story as well. Just as far as the local politics that go into that, which reminds me, I'm gonna make another jump here for a second. Since we are kind of on the movies and television theme, both versions of Red Dawn, the 2012 version and the good version, both have examples of where you have collaborators, or you have, at the very least, people who are kind of going along to get along. I believe it's the mayor in both versions of that movie, both the 2012 version and the good version. I'll say it again. That is collaborating with in the more recent version, it's the Chinese. I don't care. It's the Chinese.
Yeah. I have several issues with that, with the remake. Yeah. Several.
So you have loyalists. Which kind of, I was like, just thinking about the transition of, like, you got loyalists or you got patriots, and you got collaborators or loyalists in both the Swamp Fox show and in the Red Dawn stuff, right? I do want to say something about the whole North Koreaifying China in that movie. I gotta say it right, China. The fact that the fact that Hollywood cannot make a movie that is critical of China in a movie where the US is being invaded by a hostile communist Asian country with massive resources, you're already in a war.
Yeah.
You are already in a conflict. You're already in a war when you can't make an honest movie about what the actual likely threat is. The 1984 version was honest about what the likely threat was.
Yeah.
And that was communist revolutionary countries from South America in our hemisphere backed by the Soviets.
Mm-hmm.
That was the most likely threat. And this
the screenplay was written by a 2-star army general.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But just the fact that like in 2012, is cut the right term for that? Where it's like, we can't, the Hollywood can't be honest enough to say what the actual likely threat is, because they're so far behind the power curve that China's already winning. When you can't even describe them as the enemy, they're already winning that conflict.
Yeah. I also have problems that they can get the police department patch right, but they can't even film the movie on location, even though I know the city would be completely okay, because several movies have been filmed there before, including parts of the original were filmed on the outskirts. And no, we can't use any of that very unique skyline and things that are very unique to that area to film that movie. No, we have to film it in St. Louis.
Find that I haven't seen this whole thing.
Okay.
I've seen snippets.
So the 2012 version is supposed to be set in Spokane.
Oh, okay.
And it doesn't look anything.
It's
like
not. It's filmed in St. Louis, and it looks nothing like. There's so much stuff unique. Like you have the whole old fairgrounds from the 1972 World Fair
Yeah, and the
that are still
original,
in place, including the USSR pavilion is still standing.
I mean, the original was set in Colorado, which
Mhm.
was,
Yeah, but it was part of it was filmed in the outskirts of Spokane, out by like Colville and shit.
okay, that's fantastic. So the Spokane reference was kind of a callback.
I think
to
yeah, it was supposed to be like an ode to, and several movies have been filmed in Spokane.
but not that one. Okay.
Yeah, but not
I mean,
they wouldn't do that.
you
They'll
hear
film
all-
it in
you
St.
hear-
Louis instead.
You hear all night talking about the problems with the 2012
Mm.
movie. I will.
You have to talk about the problems with 2005 Pride and Prejudice?
A little off topic.
Oh, sorry.
I will give them credit. I will give them credit though that they did include the electronic warfare and cyber threat as a legitimate threat. So,
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's legit. On the other hand, oh God, they have one of the brothers having pictures on his phone as part of like what they're showing the Marines when they get there. It's like, oh yeah, Matt, do you have or Maddie or whatever? Do you have your phone with the picture on it? And I'm just like, you said what?
Yeah, yeah,
What did you say?
yeah, yeah. The Chinese have no idea how to manipulate cell phone networks. That's why Huawei got banned in the U.S. But you know,
I'm just watching that. I was like, oh, Scout just ruined this movie for me. And
Mhm.
Brandon Herrera ruined it in all the other ways. But oh man. I mean, I'll deal with the whole Subway sandwich thing and like so many other things, but it's like when you're doing your electronic warfare that badly.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's like the whole thing of like, oh, we're gonna do a clever Spetsnaz with clever Russian trick. We trap the boy, we spike him, and then we let him go. Great plan.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could, like, why is there a cell phone out in the middle of the mountains? Let's look up that idea. Let's that used to that's the same plan as one. That's the same
Yeah,
plan as that police sergeant that the North Koreans
yeah.
called a few months ago. That
Yeah.
might be of interest. That might be of interest. We should go check that out.
Yeah. That's weird. The cell phone's linked up in Stevens County, and it's just we just see it enter into Spokane County and then disappears back into Stevens County. This is wild. It couldn't be anything nefarious. Just happens to link up when explosions happen at our checkpoints.
Yeah, no, let's like body check this kid and like plunge oh God.
Sorry, I'm just gonna poke a hole in this storyline for a second. Not anything you guys are talking about right now, but just the whole cell phone 2012 having a usable photo.
Oh.
I did live in the real world at that point, but smartphones were kind of still rare as hen's teeth. Like the rich people had them, and that's it. And they took terrible photos. And don't even get me going on flip phone photos. So I'm a little curious about that whole thing, like
especially at distance.
Yeah, that's not big enough to drive a dump truck into.
Drive a Chinese dump truck through.
Oh!
A North Korean.
North Korean totally wasn't Chinese. It was totally North Korea. They have the ability to push power into another hemisphere.
Yes.
Totally
China,
the North Koreans.
China, don't cancel spam. We're really scared of that happening.
Fuck you.
Or that. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Love yourself a long time. So anyway.
Oh man.
So 19 the good version of Red Dawn is worth a watch.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can pick that thing, like I can just go like through a minute detail and talk about all that stuff. Yeah, I don't think
I can talk about a few other things with the
yes.
you've shown me.
You actually made some good points on the, like I was going like, oh, they need cover and there's all this stuff, and she's like, there's no way. Well, you say it.
Oh, just there's been bits and pieces that he's shown me, and I just remember like the first thing he showed me was the pair of granddaughters getting sent with the plucky heroes, and I'm just sitting there going like, there's no way they would quietly just go along with and be and like ride double with boys they have just met when they have come out of a situation where they were either theoretically where they're nearly raped, or more likely they actually were and just were too scared to say anything. It's like they're not going along with this. They should be having some kind of trauma response, other than just being deadly silent. They're not going to be compliant at this point. Like that was a miss.
Yeah, which is something, being male, I didn't.
Yeah.
Easily missed that. And I was like, I had a whole other stuff I was picking. I was thinking about with that, but I was like, oh yeah. I one of the things that I was thinking about, like in that scene, like when the old guy's like handing off ammo for the pistol and things like that, is like, we all tend to think about ourselves as the hero of our own comic book. You need to think multi-generationally, and you need to think about like your resources that you're putting by may not be used by you. This might be you might just, I mean, we kid about the loot drop tactical, but you might very well need to be like thinking about how you're going to hand this off to the next generation. Resources for them, which is what the old man does. Like, he's like, here's this. Like the old man, like he knows exactly where he needs to be, and he's fulfilling his function perfectly. He's given them information, he's given them supplies, resources, a safe house, like perfect. I honestly would have loved to have seen more of that in that movie. For us,
well, I mean, there was that opening bit at the like the gas station general store combination, where he was just like, take what you need.
Yep.
That was definitely a good example. I think, and I know we've had this conversation in person, and like when we weren't recording. I don't know if it's been recorded on air yet. But I know we've talked about like in the same vein as people see themselves as like the main character in a prepper novel. A lot of people see themselves as not being the support personnel.
Right. Because it's not glamorous to be like the just the guy who happens to give the hero the resources they need to get what they need to do. But this is this is a and here's the thing, like with different stages of life. I was having a conversation with, I think I've referenced this before, maybe not on the podcast, but I was having a conversation with another student at one of the courses, and he's older guy, even older than me, and I knew he had some resources. He used to make some money, made good money, etc., etc. And he's kind of like, I don't know, I kind of having a little bit of difficulty with. He was in good shape, but he's a little bit of difficulty doing all this stuff.
Yeah,
and I was like, look. We know that basically over the course of your life, you're trading time for financial resources and experience. So if you get to a point where like, all right, I've got all the money for all the stuff. I have all the stuff, but now my knees won't do it. Okay. Be thinking about how you hand that off to an apprentice. Make Sith great again. So you maybe have that master and apprentice kind of relationship where you just like get comfortable being the old man who is like, hey, I've got this stuff, and probably by the time you're handing it off to somebody, it's not the coolest. It's like, I've got a PVS 14. They're not quads, they're not duals. I have a PVS 14. Okay. And it's like I've got, some basic kit that will get you to the next thing. It's like, okay, this will give you a fighting chance to get to the next thing. So, like you were saying, like everybody, that'd be interesting to write a story from the perspective of one of those like one of those secondary
somebody along on like some sort of like underground movement.
Yeah.
And just like how they like setting up and like running a safe house and some of these other different things would be really interesting and a different point of view from just like I'm the main character doing all the things. Like, yeah, I don't care. It's not realistic.
Yeah. I mean, I think
Um,
Glenn Tate got a lot of that kind of logistics things
yeah.
well in his books. I think that he would have probably had the setup to do that.
Mm-hmm.
As far as like, hey man, I know we'd kind of like we'd miss a lot of the action if that's what the character did.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? I'm in my 40s. I'm well tied in here with town. The rest of the team and the SF guys, like they're better qualified to go do this
Mm-hmm.
stuff. I'm gonna hold down the fort and give you guys every bit of support that you need. Go get after it, you know.
Yeah. An interesting way you can cover handling like the actiony bits is you can have like kind of like the multiple POV thing, and not necessarily because we don't want to get it like too much like wrapped around like the guy on the ground. Move to another person who is like another support guy who is running like the talk, and have them like battle tracking
Yeah.
the op that these guys are running.
You can also use the AAR format or just the
Yeah,
simple,
that's too. Yeah.
these guys come back, in which they
Mhm.
use Glenn Tate uses that a little bit because you hear a little bit about the stories of what was going on. Yeah, you can have another character recount back to you what happened with all the exciting things. But I think that would be more relevant, honestly.
Yeah.
I thought about like a story about being I don't know there's another physician who's thought about doing this, is like writing a story from the perspective of a less than perfectly experienced medical person. Like
Mhm.
another idea he has is like a third or fourth year medical student, which I think is a little maybe a little too inexperienced.
That's what I said.
But like working in a post event scenario, doing the best they can. And I think this author needs some serious advice because he wanted this person working out of a hospital. I was like, well, first thing you need to do is get out of that
Yeah.
hospital.
I
Otherwise, the lifespan's going to be hours.
I think the idea of it being like a third or fourth year med student would be more relatable for most people
Sure.
outside of the medical field, because it would be easier for them to relate because he doesn't have, but it's like, oh, well, you've done all of this, so you're like basically a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be very similar to like, oh, you're using these medical terms that I heard my doctor use. You must be a nurse. It's like, no, I just took a couple of courses from people. Like I'm not like a medical, but you're using these big fancy words. So you must know what you're talking. So I'm going to ask you all these questions. Yeah, I think it's more relatable. I understand where you guys are coming from. Where it's like, that's not that experience. It's like, that's the point.
Yeah.
It's
No,
just enough where he's like, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God.
oh yeah, I mean, just I think the sense of being overwhelmed and inadequate to the task would be really good character development. Like
Mm-hmm.
on the back foot, and you're like, oh, okay. And one of the ways to mitigate that, the author was thinking about was have a mentor character come along,
Mm-hmm.
kind of brings them along. It's like, okay, well, we're gonna like I'll teach you how to do X, Y, or Z, right? Um, but yeah, I've thought about like if I was on the road,
Mm-hmm.
I got stuck in the middle of an event, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm stuck here, and they're just putting everybody to work as best they can to handle whatever this is, right? Let's say they close down the state border and I can't get back across the state border, and I'm here at this like along an interstate at an exit ramp or kind of there. I was like, all right, well, we're repurposing the buildings here into clinical stuff and whatever. Like, all right, what do you use to handle the kinds of injury patterns and issues that you're going to have coming in? Less than ideal circumstances. And just kind of thinking through, hour one through day one through week one, like how long can you go with this until you're like, all right, I'm out.
Mm-hmm.
Sneak out and go about your life, get get to the point like, all right, I've been here a month. I really have other things I need to be doing, and you just sneak out and keep going. But that would be an interesting exercise, and just like, all right, we got a Dollar General here, you got a gas station over there. Like, what can we do with that for what we're seeing, right?
Yeah.
So, all right, what other movies or television do you think about for just stuff that's kind of underrated?
Oh, can we talk about Shark?
Oh, Sharp. Speaking of getting stuck on the other side of a bridge, um,
Open that can of worms, be my guest.
the Sharp series is quite unknown and quite underrated.
On this side of the pond.
On this side of the pond, yeah, the Brits love it. But yeah, Napoleonic era. Honestly, a good amount of lessons in leadership just in the first episode.
Yeah.
Being a guy like you as the leader don't want to be there. Your men don't trust you, and you're all just kind of thrown into this together, figuring out how to make that work.
Yeah.
Because you've seen at least some of the episodes. I know we watched Sharp's Rifles.
You watched Sharp Rifles
when we were at Soma.
I think we got through. I know we watched the second one. I can't remember if we watched the third.
Rifles and Eagle.
Yeah, we watched a few, 2 or 3 of them, I think.
Yeah.
And like, hey, I mean, like when you've got a former para officer referencing Sharp as where he learned some of his leadership lessons. Oh, like that's pretty worthwhile. I mean, some of it's a little silly in places, but it's not all bad. It's interesting. So Sharp's good. I like The Great Raid, frankly.
Still need to watch that
as a movie. That was actually one of the things that movie came up when I was watching this video from Soleil Archive about like how you're going to dress. I'm like, all right, I know it's another movie, but go watch The Great Raid and keep in mind that you are the Filipinos, not the Americans. Okay? You're going to be in your like raggedy civilian clothes with your Thompson submachine gun, trying not to get killed. Trying to link up safely with the Americans and trying not to get machine gunned by the Japanese. I mean, that's best case scenario in that you're the Filipinos.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff as far as like in that movie where the Catholic Church is very much or not the Catholic Church as a whole, but like there's a priest there, a couple priests. The church is part of that underground resistance to the Japanese occupation. There's an American nurse who is got false papers as a Canadian. She's not military, but she's got false papers as a Canadian, and she's working in the hospital and trying to smuggle little bits of medicine and little things to the POWs down the road in the POW camp. There's also interesting, again, going back to World War II levels of technology when they're getting ready to launch this whole raid, and you don't have radios or really not a lot. And you got a plan, right? You got your whole plan. You've sand tabled it. Everybody's got the plan. And everything gets initiated with the first shot. And so everybody's got coordinated watches, right? And it's is one of the captains. He's like a captain or a lieutenant. I think it was a lieutenant. And he's like, he's talking to the top sergeant, and the top sergeant comes rolling along in the ditch, and it's like, all right, sir, it's your shot. He's like, go double check, make sure that everybody's in their place, because like I do not want to set this off without knowing for sure, because you can't just get on the radio. And guess what, guys? Like you may or may not be able to get on the radio. And so just these, okay, it causes a little bit of irritation with the other officers. He's like, yeah, we're ready. Tell them to go. It's like, yeah, we've been ready for the last 10 minutes. So there's a little bit of friction there. Everybody's anxious. But that might just have to be the way you do it. It's just keep that ego under control. Understand everybody's anxious. Understand nobody wants to screw this up.
Yeah.
Just have a little tactical patience.
For that phrase.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, Scout uses it a lot. And I found it to be very true. Just like, okay, just take a step back, chill,
Deep breath.
submit your ego, and just give people a little time. Like you don't want to get behind the power curve, but anyway, so that's a good movie for a lot of reasons. There's a lot in that movie. I mean, Jericho's a standby for Prepper Fiction. Have you watched that?
No.
Yeah, I mean it's not perfect by any means. It does have an element of it where they stand up a local security force, using the Ranger Handbook. They don't really go through how that all works. It's kind of like they're kind of hitting little wave tops, right? It's like that, and that show didn't last nearly long enough. But the CIA guy's pretty interesting. Again, that show is more character driven, and it's more about what goes on with the human drama, which is an element something to think about.
All right, let's take a quick break.
Yeah.
All right, and we're back. Not that you guys noticed any difference, because I'm not going to edit in any music for the entire time that we were paused, because that would make this entirely too long. So it'll just be this like stop and then start, and you'll be like, "What do you mean you're back? You were never gone." But don't worry about it. I apologize if you can hear the train in the background.
It was interesting to watch. It was interesting to watch like a swatting in action. That was entertaining.
Oh, where did you watch one of those?
Oh, wasn't that was just happening? No, this is not the Tim Pool podcast. Never mind.
No, this is an actual that's a train horn. That's not.
Okay.
That's not the sound of an old Matt V.
Okay.
Besides, I know my sheriff department doesn't have one of those. They just have a bunch of unarmored Humvees and deuce and a halves.
Yeah, some things don't age well. Some jokes don't age. I had to explain to an older friend of mine what swatting was.
Oh man,
the swatting thing. It's like I explained it, and it's like, yeah, we live in that world.
Yep.
So yeah, we were just talking about shows. One show that's probably not very well known is The Colony. And that's just like the premise is aliens have invaded and taken over, and humanity is being kind of administered by other humans, and it's all set in Los Angeles. And so you have an underground kind of resistance to all this. And that's at least the first season or so is kind of interesting, just as far as how things get done or don't get done, and like how messages are relayed. It's not like super technical like the Americans, as far as like the technical accuracies are not really dwelt upon like the Americans. But it's not the worst thing you can watch.
The Colony has a lot of stuff buried in it that I never watched it long enough to tell if this was intentional or not, but just it had a lot of stuff that you could look at and go, wow, they could go somewhere with this, as far as like that there's no children.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, you pointed that out. Yeah. Their care for their wounded fighters is a bullet to the head. They get a guy shot on an ambush because things go bad, and the leader just shoots him in the head, and I'm like,
huh.
That's an approach. I'm not sure that you're gonna have a real good recruitment campaign, and that's the medical plan.
Yeah.
That's honestly what bothered me the most about that. It was just like this was your plan. Didn't have like, hey, if you get shot and you can't move you, we're just gonna cap you in the head and keep moving.
Yeah.
It's a technique. I don't think that's gonna serve you well in the long term.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Another like fairly interesting one that I can think of was Oh man, what is the name of that show? Oh Lord, that's gonna bug the crap out of me.
And
Sounds like a good cure for constipation.
describe it for me.
Oh, Revolution. That's what it is.
Oh, Revolution. Yeah.
That's an interesting. It kind of plays to the boober fantasy of an EMP knocking out all electronics, so they can, well, this generation doesn't know how to use a manual transmission. It's like, hey, real quick, what's that Chevy 1500 in your driveway? Is that an automatic or? Oh, it's an automatic. Okay, cool, gotcha. Cool. Appreciate it. Yeah.
The issue with that show was that they couldn't get a once they started the beginning of that show was really interesting because like weapons like any like black powder weapons were
Yes.
rare, right? Like they were heavily regulated. Like any kind of firearms were like rare exception. Like the whole I don't know if it was an episode or a series of episodes was just about getting a decent amount of a little bag of ammo to
Yes.
some of these resistance people that had like an M24.
Yeah.
And like so bolt action and like he's like
Mm-hmm.
then you get a few seasons in and they're just like full auto fire with M4s and it's just like
Yep. It jumped the
okay,
shark relatively quickly.
this is stop and I get it, Walking Dead did the same thing, except they didn't. The Walking Dead, I mean, the characters in Walking Dead are so good with full auto weapons, they don't need sights.
Yes.
They can use flat top Picatinny with a front post at most. Just like
Yes.
they're good. They're just that good.
Yeah, that was an interesting show for sure.
You can find full auto AR-15s, not imports, full auto AR-15s.
Yeah.
No sighting system, no optics.
There was in like the early 2010s, there was a lot of like apocalyptic stuff coming out because that was when oh god, this is gonna it's gonna bug me trying to remember the name of this. There was another show about like a pandemic that goes around and
Last ship.
The Last Ship. Thank you.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you. That one was another interesting.
Yeah.
Except that one had McSteamy in it as the captain of the boat.
Oh, I mean, it had some other. It had Rona Mitra, who apparently just plays characters named Rachel. Because in that show, her character's named Rachel, and Strike Back, her character's named Rachel. She basically
once you get typecast, it's hard to get out of that.
She plays one character with various levels of technical skill, tactical skill, depending on the story.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, she's typecast that one character really well.
There's still a lot of apocalyptic movies coming out because that was like at the like the trailing edge of like the zombie phenomenon, because that was like a couple years into like The Walking Dead being popular, which I got into until like it got really weird. And like Rick started seeing hallucinations when he was in the prison, and I was like, yeah, that's enough for me. I'm just gonna stop this. He started like seeing like hallucinations of his dead wife, and I'm like, no, this is not for me.
That's the shallow and weird pool.
Yeah.
Now they've got 2 spin-off shows.
I've seen that.
I don't know, it might be interesting.
I do like the character the actor that plays Negan, because he's also in Supernatural.
Okay, I remember him from Texas Rising.
Yeah, he plays Sam and Dean's dad.
Okay.
In the Supernatural series.
Good actor.
Good actor. Yeah, definitely good actor.
He's nowhere near.
And Norman Reedus is just quality. If you're one of the OGs that remember him from
Boondock Saints.
I
mean, what they have done with that character over the course of Walking Dead. Oh man, like that is that is fantastic. Yeah. And Carol's character, the Carol character, was really interesting to watch that. I think that's probably one of the better things that they did with the writing was under stress like that, you can't necessarily just predict who's going to thrive and who's going to just right.
Yeah.
There's some generalities, but depending on the circumstances, depending on how things go, and I realize it's a work of fiction, but Carol was a believable character as far as like how she processed her trauma and
Yeah.
how she came out of it. Yeah, saved their butts several times. Just one time specifically being an outsider, because she was the only one that didn't get sucked into this trap. Oh God! When they're going to turn, and then they almost get eaten by the cannibals. I'm just like, I'm watching this like, all right, they're already suspicious, right? They're being suspicious, they're being cautious, they're gonna bury these weapons outside, they're bury weapons outside. I was like, all right, you're caching weapons outside the perimeter, cool. You sit on that perimeter for a couple of days and you watch these people. A couple of weeks if you need to. You sit and you watch. I mean, that's the lesson of The Walking Dead is you don't commit to anything until you have done a thorough reconnaissance of what's going on.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that show would have even more long stretches of cicadas in the background than it already. The honest trailer for it would just be one long cicada sound effect.
That's how you know it takes place in the Southeast, is it's just cicadas. Like that's what lets you know.
Oh, filmed in Georgia. You don't say.
Yeah, I had no idea. Just the constant screaming of bugs in the background. Oh boy, it's cicada season again. Can't wait for those little bastards to crawl into holes and die again.
Yeah, that show was the main thrust of that show to me. Like the lesson is, don't be in a hurry to die. Take your time. Just take, you know, all you got.
Patience is a virtue.
All the time in the world. And the other whole thing with the Walking Dead thing and the zombie fascination, I felt like, because that was kind of around this time that I was kind of coming to prepping, and I was reading James Rawls and all that kind of stuff. I feel like there was a lot of anxiety that people were using the zombie thing as a catharsis for.
Yep.
Like I think they were more generally anxious about real things in the world, and they were
Yeah.
using apocalypse as like, oh well, we're just talking about zombies.
I mean, this is like ISIS is starting up at this point in time. You have like the fledglings of Antifa starting to take shape before it like officially became like a big thing in, what was it, 2015, 2016, when Antifa really became like a popular buzzword.
The 2008.
Yeah, because it was right before the election that Antifa really became like a big thing. Yeah, so it was probably 2015. Early 2016.
2008, 2010 housing.
Yeah, so you just come off of the recession, and you've got all of these things like stacking up, war kind of ticking back up, and everyone's kind of like, and there's like the whole like, oh, is the world gonna end in 2012 thing, and like they even made a movie about it. And,
right. I feel like there was a lot of anxiety even back then that people were just, they're
sublimating into all these different attentions.
That's what gave us.
They didn't want to admit that things were failing. There was still this idea that we were still in some sort of like Pax Americana, even though we had been at war for a decade.
Yeah, we've been at war for a decade, and what has changed? Right?
Yeah. So, and that kind of leads in, like, there's a quote that I heard when I was first joining, that, you know, America's not at war, the Marine Corps is at war. America's at the mall.
Yeah.
And especially like at that time point, at like 2010, 2011, nobody was thinking about that. Everyone was just living their lives, unless you like had an immediate or like one step removed immediate family member that was serving.
Yeah.
You didn't know what was going on in Iraq. That was like something from like 2005.
Yeah.
In Afghanistan, you remember that from like 2008, but that wasn't important anymore. We weren't doing anything in Afghanistan. And I
Yeah.
remember like explaining, like having to explain to people that like, no, we were in Afghanistan like a while before we were in Iraq. And they were like, no, the Iraq war was first. And no, it wasn't. That was in March 2003. Like I distinctly remember watching the invasion happen on the news. And like the invasion of Afghanistan was shortly after the towers fell.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, 12 strong at least gave some, at least
Yeah,
gonna set that. Like, all right, he was like, no, we like special forces were going to Afghanistan.
ODAs were in there within less than a month after that had happened.
They just weren't talking about it yet.
Yeah.
No, there were no reporters.
Mhm.
But so I think part of that was, I think it's fair to say it's kind of where the brovet thing came out of, because you have you have the military folks.
Yeah, it was.
Like that, and this is war. The war is their thing.
Mhm.
It's not their thing.
Yeah, it was about that time. That was when a lot of those. I mean, this like predates Black Rifle Coffee. This is like Article 15 clothing and Ranger Up apparel, which then they come together to form Black Rifle Coffee. But like both of those together, like those things were like a thing. And this is like the early days of like tactical, like the YouTube presence of like tactical response, and like the Magpul videos had just come out, and like everybody had the Magpul DVDs, and like Chris Costa and Travis Haley were like the big thing on YouTube. That's all anyone could ever talk about. Were those things, and like Nuttin' Fancy was in his heyday.
Yep. So I mean, I think that's where this all started, and it is a problem, because it's a problem for your warrior class to be loyal to itself.
Yes.
Any of this is conscious. I don't think any of this is conscious, but unconsciously they're more loyal to themselves as a class than they are to the society as a whole. And while I don't think that's conscious, I'm going to give them credit that that's not a conscious thing. We've seen it play out at an unconscious.
I mean, that's how you get the Praetorian Guard.
Yes, exactly.
That's exactly how that comes about, and that's it. It was like a recruiting campaign. I mean, I know that was definitely you are part of like the 1% that's like joining in, and like it was like 3% of the American Revolution, and you are like even smaller than that. And it's like, damn, I am special. And then like you get to the fleet and you're like, no, I'm not special. I'm just another fucking dude who made a mistake and believed the lies of a guy in a fancy uniform. And yeah, no, this is not me saying that I regret my service. I do not. I'm not one of those guys that like, I'm not like, I hate the Marine Corps. I hate the Army. Like, no, like they're institutions.
Let's just be accurate about what actually happened, right? Like, let's just be clear.
And
just that the culture that came out of that and continues to come out of that.
It can be very dangerous when that's your selling point, is like, you are special because you did this. It's like, well, yeah, but at the same time, like when recruiting is a lot different now than it was 40, 50 years ago. You could just get anybody in. It was like, I have an uncle who joined the Marine Corps because a judge told him it's prison time or the Marine Corps.
Yep.
That was a thing. Like, you would either go to jail or you would join the Marine Corps. That was, and like, that's not a joke. That's not a trope. Like, that's a real life thing that happened.
I was a friend of mine who was like super motivated to go in the Marine Corps, and for years, and then finally got old enough, and it went in. It's a very homeschooled, very sheltered kid.
Yeah.
I'm gonna repeat myself. Um, and then he finds out like what he told me was like he's like 2/3 of the Marine Corps have like his drug histories, either
Mhm.
like using and or dealing.
Yeah.
Like obviously, if they stay, they dealt with that issue.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, this was different than like what I thought I was getting into, right?
Mm-hmm.
As far as like what people's backgrounds are and like who's in the Marine Corps. Um, and so yeah, that was kind of interesting. Like, huh? Yeah, I
That's
think
kind of always been like what the point. I feel like that's part of what recruiting now is missing out on, is that recruiting for a military was always it didn't matter where you came from and what you had for the vast majority of human history and at least American history, to really kind of narrow it down. It wasn't like, oh, what have you gone to college? Do you have you done this thing? Do you have like this thing? Have you done this? It was like, yeah, don't worry about any of that. Like, we're gonna like fix your problems and we're gonna make you better. It was never about what you were bringing to the organization. It was what the organization was gonna bring to you. And
Mhm.
like it was the perfect like textbook example of, it's not the cards that you're dealt, it's how you handle it.
Mhm.
It's not the hand that you get dealt. It's how you handle what was given to you that matters. And the military was like that the embodiment of that phrase, that it was a
Mhm.
chance for people to get past their mistakes in life. And now it's like, oh, you have like a speeding ticket. Mm.
A lot of risk aversion in the modern military. Is my as an outsider,
Yes,
just
we have I say we as if I'm somehow still in.
I get it. I get it.
The military has turned in their speed of violence for safety. We've gotten so safety focused and so risk averse that it's like, we can't do that. Someone might get hurt. It's like, hey,
Natural.
real quick, what's the purpose of a rifle platoon? Oh, to close with and destroy the enemy with small arms fire. Oh, so that means people on our side are gonna what? They're gonna die. I
I think
understand that like we should try to limit like training deaths and training casualties as much as possible, but if we're just like, well, we can't do that, someone might get hurt. Oh no, it's almost like we have people who their job is to treat people to get hurt. And not saying that we should just do like risky things just to do like risky things, but we should keep certain things in mind that it's like, I'm not that worried about it.
I was thinking it really reminds me of that paper that Dr. Lyons wrote. And like when we'll talk about that on a different day, but
Yes.
the my reading of it is I think she's fairly clear-eyed about what the problems are.
Mm-hmm.
I think she's also fairly aware of her own difficulty grokking the massive amount of casualties and the extreme limitations you're going to have on being able to save people
Yes.
in the guerrilla medical system she's proposing. In any
Mm-hmm.
kind of these denied environments, is like you're going to lose people. You're going to lose a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like, this is what you've had as the golden hour. Like that's the exception, not the rule.
Yeah. You're not going to be transporting to a field surgical team that has like two or three cardiac surgeons and a neuro guy on hand, and
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be lucky if there's an MD that has surgical training outside of residency.
Yeah, had some
It's
sort of
like
surgical procedures. Had
like,
like
hey, this
done.
guy's an ortho doc as his full time gig.
Yeah, or you've got like an ER doc who maybe had like a vascular workshop or symposium that he could manage a bleeder or a non-compressible hemorrhage or something. But yeah, those casualty rates, I mean, that's hard. That's tough, man. That's really tough.
Yeah,
All right, happy thoughts, happy thoughts. But yeah, I do
yeah,
look forward to going through that. That should be good.
yeah.
Any other thoughts on just kind of this edition of Spam Goes to the Movies?
I,
There's more. There's always more.
there's always we could. I mean,
And if we run out of good stuff, we can talk about the bad stuff. It's a lot more.
if I didn't have a time hack, we could continue this for like, and if I knew you didn't have a time hack, we could continue this for like another 3 hours, and we could get into like some real esoteric, like just like really deep dive into some stuff. Like, no, like there is some stuff to gain out of the Lego movie. Like you don't understand. Like we could really deep dive this. I will take that as a threat.
Well, you were in avionics, so let's talk about that.
Yeah, we're gonna pull in Top Gun. We're gonna like Flight of the Eagle, like the whole thing. We're going there. 80s fighter pilot movies. Let's go. We'll throw in Flight of the Navigator just for fun.
No, Up is like the very tippy top, very tippy top of aviation film.
Don't lose your GPS.
Oh, you might want that. Yep. Oh,
All right.
fun. Yeah. There's always more. There's always
Oh
more.
yeah. Oh yeah. I'm excited to go through that Dr. Lyons page, or article, or whatever it was that she wrote.
Is a thesis for her
Yeah,
master's.
thesis. Yeah,
Yeah.
the dissertation. That it's that thing is amazing.
Yeah, we'll go through the Reader's Digest version because goodness. 225, 250 pages. Goodness.
And we'll do that after you get your article written out, so people can kind of read through it, and then we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
And that way we can answer questions that people are gonna have, because they're gonna.
Yeah, a lot of those questions are gonna be like, I don't know. You have to ask her that. What was she thinking? Oh.
Yeah, that's a great question.
That paper raises more questions than it does anything else. But those are good questions to write.
Is that the point of a good dissertation?
Yeah.
Not that I've ever written one, or probably ever will, but
I haven't either. I did the doctorate route where I didn't have to write. That's 5 out of 5 stars. Highly recommend.
Yeah. You just have to read a lot of other people's papers. You just don't have to write any.
Yeah, you do have to deal with some bodily otherwise. But yeah,
Right.
it's a good thing. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, that one's going to be a really good, because man, that one is it answers for people that have had questions about what are you doing for medical. It answers that question like to a T. And like that one it's a good paper. All right. Yeah. I don't have anything else. I think we've, in a roundabout way, really kind of hit some important stuff and had a good discussion. I'm pretty sure this one's probably gonna beat the last 2 that we've uploaded, because there is no like real clear cut topic, and those seem to do well.
My final thought is to quote from old Remus: "In thought and deed, stay away from crowds."